Hello everyone. In this video, I am going to continue my discussion on the historical context of the early 20th century literature. And I would request you to go through my previous videos. One is on modernity, and another is on the First World War and how it impacted the literature of the modern. The links to those videos are in the description of this video. So, if we talk about women's movements in the early 20th century, we have to understand the concept of new women or new woman. Now, to understand that, we have to see how the cultural image of women changed in the late 19th century. So, let's begin. In the late 19th century, there was already anxiety concerning women's roles in societies and families. And this happened primarily because of a new cultural concept emerged called New Woman. And this emerged in the late 19th century. At the same time, we have to consider that there were movements for women's suffrage or voting rights and birth control because women's voting rights or right to vote, choose the government, and their reproductive rights became primary issues in the late part of the 19th century. And as there was the First World War, men were preoccupied with war. They had to leave their houses. And this was the time when women joined the workforce. They were no more restricted within the four walls. They started to go out more and more. And hence, they explored increasingly the new world, which was hitherto occupied by men only. So, if we look at the term the new woman, we have to consider that it was a very popular term among the writers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It was first used by Sarah Grant and Maria Luisa Ramey, an English novelist, used it later as a response to Sarah Grant's article. Now, what did the term new woman imply during that time? It implied a woman who is progressive, educated, and sexually and socially liberated. A woman who is not going to conform to the roles that have been assigned to her by the patriarchal society. Now, this new woman was aware of the fact that she can work, she can go out, she can do whatever a man can do. Hence, this was a very popular term which was gaining currency in the world of literature as well, produced by both male and female writers. You can think of Henrik Ibsen's plays, especially Doll's House, Bernard Shaw's New Woman, as it appears in Candida, and several other plays that Shaw wrote as the problem plays. Henry James's writings. Now, the suffragette movement that emerged in the late 19th century sought voting rights for women, which was officially disapproved in the 1830s. Now, what happened in the 1830s? In the 1830s, the Reform Bill came And as it increased the voting rights for men, it decreased the scope for women's liberation, for women's rights, in the sense that officially it banned women from voting. Previously, women could vote, especially the moneyed women, but then with the reform bill of the 1830s, women officially lost their rights to vote. This term suffragette refers to the members of a very radical organization named Women's Social and Political Union, WSPU. It was founded by Emmeline Pankhurst in 1903, and it engaged in direct action and civil disobedience. Now, you have to remember that this was a time when the first wave feminist movement was already gaining its ground, and primarily the first wave feminist movement advocated for women's legal rights, and it tried to project women as equal to men. Later on in the subsequent years, especially in the mid 20th century and later, when the second wave feminist movement emerged, the course of action for feminism changed. So, those would be discussed later. If you are interested, you can go through the movement called feminism, which has several phases: first, second, third, and now fourth. So, women's suffrage was about the voting rights by women. It was a fight for the right to vote. As I mentioned before, that women were not explicitly banned from voting in Great Britain until 1832 Reform Act and the 1835 Municipal Corporations Act. And after that, as these two acts increased the franchisee for men, it completely obliterated the scope for women's suffrage. So it became a national movement in the Victorian era, as already we can talk about we can talk about the fact that already there were premonitions of feminist consciousness in the writings of the late 18th century. Think of Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication for the Rights of Women, and you can think of the writings of John Stuart Mill and Harriet Mill, his wife. So already women's rights, women's issues were gaining currency in the cultural sphere. Now it was 1918, after the First World War, because during the First World War, which began in 1914, the movement for women's suffrage was paused for 4 or 5 years, and then in 1918 a coalition government passed the Representation of the People Act, and this enfranchised all men as well as all women over the age of 30, and also only those women could vote who had minimum property qualifications. So this was still restricted within a particular domain. It was restricted by age and it was restricted by the economic position. And then in 1928, the Conservative government passed the Representation of the People Act. It was also known as the Equal Franchise Act. which gave the right to all women to vote, and this time the age was 21, and hence women came on equal terms with men. So this is how women's suffrage gained its ground in the Great Britain. And as these movements gained currency day by day, we can think of the impact of these movements on literature. And that's why you will find that there are several women writers who are writing about women, about sexuality. In fact, there are male writers like D.H. Lawrence who are not afraid to talk about women's sexuality. So, hence, these are my references. We would talk about the context of the literature of the early 20th century in the subsequent videos. Thanks for watching.